My prediction is that as transhumanism develops, it's pretty much all just going to be an entire sex industry. like it's good. You've got all these nerds with all of these high ideals, and then once all this stuff actually starts going to be developed, it's all just going to be sex.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mind Matters. We got the full crew here today. We've got Harrison, we've got Ilan, we've got Lucien Koch across the pond. Today we're going to do a bit of a mishmash of several different things. Hopefully we'll be able to tie all of the various pieces of this complex puzzle together into something coherent and hopefully enjoyable and insightful. So we're going to be talking a little bit about maybe Paul in the afterlife and then some contemporary stuff as well. So let's start with that. Harrison, you just wrote a piece on the cluster B personality and a recent manifestation that has gone viral across the interwebs with the Canadian shop teacher who decided that they were now a woman and started attending classes and teaching classes in the most ludicrously ridiculous costume, even though it's attire. Mm-hmm. It's really just a costume with the largest melons I've ever seen in my life. So what was that about?
Well, I started the article by just giving a brief summary of the case, which you so eloquently put. That's pretty much all of the story that's in the news. So shop teacher, apparently in the last year or so, he transitioned to being a woman, which essentially means he now dresses like a woman. So he's a shop teacher. Goes by the name of Kayla Lemieux in an Ontario school. And probably most viewers have seen the pictures if they read the news. So apparently it looks like he's doing this every day. Like this is just the way he comes to school now. And just with a set of prosthetic breasts that are just gargantuan. Now, it's a sensitive topic because well, on the one hand, if it was real, it would just be someone's anatomy. But in this case, it's a man actually purposefully, putting on this as a costume. So these aren't real breasts. It's not even like they're implants. It's like a movie prosthetic, and just like ginormous, and with a thin T-shirt, and the prosthetic breasts are anatomically correct, so they've got giant erect nipples, and so he comes to school in this tight shirts, tight thin shirts, so everything pokes through, and then like short tight shorts or skirts. Yeah, one kind of looked like a skirt, but it was short, so maybe skirts also, and then like long blonde wig. But it's obviously a guy dressed up as a woman, and so some people complained or just kind of talked to the school board about it and was like, okay, well, what's going on here? And the school board sent out their boilerplate message like that this is we uphold the rights of all staff and students to create a safe and inclusive environment for any form of gender identity or gender expression, and that it's kind of a I'll get the language that they used. So yeah, all staff have the right to equitable treatment without discrimination based upon gender identity and gender expression. And so more boilerplate about creating a positive learning environment, their school values, and ensuring a safe and inclusive environment. So, the teacher's allowed to do this. The parents just got brushed off. The students are probably just having a laugh. You know, it's not a very serious environment to be teaching in. So I contrasted this with a story that came out either the same day or the day after, or maybe the day before, regardless, very close in time, of Jordan Peterson visiting a private school, a state school in England, one of the most successful. And he's basically just took a photo with the headmistress of the school, Catherine Birbal Singh, and she posted it on Twitter. And so then I just ask, or state, one guess which of the two, Lemieux or Birbal Singh, was reported to the police. Because the headmistress of the school was reported to the police for hate crime for taking a picture with Jordan Peterson. And meanwhile, there's this man dressed up in like a kind of absurd burlesque imitation of a woman and like totally sexualized, coming to school and teaching children. And yet that is like, to say anything against that is just an unforgivable sin. Like that means you're mean, you're a bigot, you're not inclusive, you're discriminatory. And so my article is trying to piece together why exactly all of this is happening, because it seems strange, or at least I think it should seem strange, and it does seem strange, probably, I'm guessing, to, if not the majority of Americans and Canadians, then at the very least the majority of humans, because the Western world seems to be the only, societies on the planet for whom this is a thing. And of course, for the advocates of this way of looking at the world, that just means we've got the correct morality and everyone else is wrong. And the implication of all of this and what actually happens is a form of like a paramoral imposition on other people that you will be forced to come around to our way of seeing things. So like one of the commenters, Jay Rollins, on my piece had put it, the goal is to dominate the public space, to absolutely to establish complete control over the public space, so that there's no room for dissent, for even just expressing a contrary opinion, or to just say, I think this is wrong. You know, never in our history has this kind of behavior been accepted, allowed. And it's not like American culture or Western culture has always been totally Puritan in its sexual beliefs and practices. Like, I mean, for decades, for generations, there's been a place and a time for this, right? We have had pride parades. We have had the free love in the 60s. We've had Woodstock. We've got TV shows and movies where all of this stuff is portrayed. And we have gay bars and places where this is, at least, allowed and accepted to some degree, or just acknowledged and accepted. And yet when it comes to schools, or any kind of professional environment, even just in the workplace, it's not like there's ever been a time where people are encouraged to come to work in bikinis or in mankinis.
And this is something that Josh Slocum has talked about on his show numerous times, where it's this new development where bring your whole self to work, where you're supposed to bring.
Please no.
Yeah, exactly. And that's his thing is, and I would totally agree, is like some things are better left at your own home, behind closed doors. Like whatever you do in your bedroom should stay in your bedroom. You shouldn't take all of that with you. You shouldn't be walking around. If bondage is your thing, that shouldn't be something that you go to teach your classes in, for example.
Or you go to work in. It's like when you go to work, you're not wearing your sexual fetish, paraphernalia. You're not advertising your sexuality at work. And I mean, social interaction is a complex thing. Like, it's not like we have a set of hard and fast rules that we follow. And like in some schools, right, where the skirt had to be no more than 2 inches above the knee, right? And the headmistress would bring out the ruler, or the nun would bring out the ruler, right? I've heard stories like that from, I think, At least my mom. I don't know how common it is now, but it used to be that way.
Well, I have a fun story for that one. One of my teachers because one of the students had come in like very ripped jeans, and the teacher took a stapler and stapled all of the holes together. So at least, 20 years ago, thereabouts, right. It was still, remnants of it were still there.
Right. So there will always be people, like men and women, who will push the boundaries. Now, I think like for men, the professional attire for men is pretty standardized, suit and tie for the most part in certain environments, right? And different environments have different, codes, different expectations, even if they're unstated, they're implicit.
That has been like changed in recent years as well, right? I mean, it's kind of interesting. I think in the last 10 years, the suit has almost disappeared from the office environment. I mean, there are certain exceptions, like lawyers, for example, but even they often don't wear a tie anymore. But bankers, it's pretty much gone, suit and tie, at least in the US. And I think also increasingly in Europe. And that was the last, island of suit and tie left. I mean, all the, creative industries, they abandoned it even before. But it's just interesting to note that, these developments, they seem to go a bit hand in hand, right? I mean, if you have like a strict dress code for work, for all kinds of professions, then something like that just wouldn't be a thing. So it's kind of like a necessary condition, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And so, but within those conditions, so you have pushing the limits, right? So you see this in high school, for instance. You'll have some of the girls that will push the limits on the revealing clothes that they'll wear, and to the point where sometimes it's like borderline, and the teachers won't say anything. But then sometimes the teachers will be like, "No, you've got to put some clothes on." For one reason, it's really distracting. I mean, if you have 20 teenage boys in the room, they're not going to be able to pay attention to class. So out of consideration for the hormonal boys in the room, that's just one reason. But there's that attention-seeking behavior that you'll often find. And that's really what it comes down to, I think, is it's attention-seeking behavior. It's, okay, I want people to look at me, I want people to notice me, and maybe for a sexual reason, maybe for another reason. And it's those kind of it's that kind of implicit social just custom that has really gone down the drain. That's really just been thrown out, and maybe it comes with the relaxation of some of the strict rules. That plays a part, but never has it been that it's just totally a free for all, right? So there are certain expectations for instance, for a teacher. A teacher should look like a teacher, should look professional, and shouldn't be distracting. So if a teacher comes in wearing a bikini, that's not going to be appropriate. If a male teacher comes in wearing a Speedo, that's not going to be appropriate. Like you can't do your job dressed like that. You should dress like a teacher. Just like it's the same thing in any kind of position like that. Not only for strictly practical reasons, like, if you're a construction worker, you're not going to wear certain types of clothes, same thing. But especially with a profession or a job that has some kind of social responsibility, traditionally teachers have fit into that category. They are the ones instructing youths, and sex is never a part of it. It's about teaching children. And for a teacher to place more importance on their personal presentation and the expression of their sexuality and their gender identity is like, it shows a profound irresponsibility and just a profound narcissism. It's the same thing with the transgender athletes, the girls or the boys who end up competing with girls because they identify and express their gender as women. So it's just a profound narcissism to think to know that you are naturally just stronger because of your male body, and then think, no, everyone else should see things the way I see them, should accept me for who I am, and I don't really care if I've got an unfair advantage over all these girls because the expression of my gender identity is more important than just basic fairness and sportsmanlike behavior. And that's what that seems to be the core feature of what's going on here, a profound narcissism and lack of responsibility. Again, if it shouldn't even be an issue whether or not the teacher is gender non-conforming, because it shouldn't have anything to do with the classroom. Again, if you come in the classroom and you should be nondescript. You shouldn't be advertising like giant breasts, for instance. And why such giant prosthetic breasts? That's the question. That in itself, it's like some women do have breasts that are that large. It happens. It's natural. But for a man to then identify as a woman, but specifically as a woman with absolutely giant, beach ball.
The 0.01% of 0.01% in terms of.
Right. It's advertising something. It's a statement. It's an attention-seeking behavior. And I don't know this guy. I don't know what's going on with him, but I'm guessing chances are there's at least an element of autogynephilia in there, that it is a fetish, that he gets some kind of sexual pleasure out of presenting himself and seeing himself and have others perceive him in some way as a woman. And so that's why it comes back to what I said earlier about, like, a school environment is not a place to be showing off your fetish. It would be like, one of the commenters on my Substack mentioned, it's like, well, are we going to see people like coming in bondage and like wearing, strap-on dildos? It's like, that's not the place for it. So I brought up an example from Cleckley's The Caricature of Love. He quotes a letter that was written to him by a young doctor in a small, American community, population of around 5,000. And the doctor was telling him this story about this 40-year-old sixth grade teacher, a man, and three of the boys had complained or told their parents stories about this teacher. And the parents had contacted this doctor, and the doctor had contacted the school board, and eventually the doctor contacted Cleckley to be like, am I crazy here? Because this was the story. This teacher, well, first of all, he was just telling, some of the stories were that he was telling dirty stories and like dirty jokes to the boys. So like, risque jokes and stories with sexual innuendos. And so the parents and this doctor thought it inappropriate, and so told the school board about it. The school board's like, no, it's there's nothing wrong with that. One of the mothers that was complaining just has something against him because there were rumors that he'd beaten up another boy and it wasn't even her son. So she's just on a vendetta. So we're just going to ignore it. But then some of the other stories from the boys were that, oh well, he would also take boys back to his bachelor apartment and wrestle with them. Sometimes he'd just happen to, fondle their genitals while he's wrestling with them. One time one of the boys was leaning over against the table and he unzipped his pants and then pretended to hump the kid, and it was all laugh, and he didn't actually do anything after that. It was just a big joke, and the boys were thinking, oh well, maybe this is some kind of just like sexual joke or something. And so no stories of him actually, raping boys, but I wouldn't be surprised if he had groomed some kids and, in the process, it sounds like it's probably likely. And so again, this doctor tells the school board these stories, and they say they looked into them. They send like a vague letter to the parents saying, oh, well, here are some of the charges against him, but we've decided to retain him as a teacher. We're sure that none of this will happen again, right? This was in the 1950s. One of the commenters had the same thought that I did. I'd thought that maybe things were a bit stricter back then. Maybe there was no allowance for this type of behavior. But apparently not. It's pretty similar to the world we're living in now. And in fact, I'd think that despite the fact that there is still like there are still prosecutions against pedophile teachers. You know, they still go to jail. They still get charged when they get caught. Our culture is, in other ways, it is much worse. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are more attempts, because there have been several attempts, to normalize pedophilia. You know, now we've got this, you know, we've got the queer theorists and people like them that are saying that, you know, there should be a P in the LGBTQ plus P, and that, oh, but we can't call them pedophiles, they're minor attracted persons, MAPS. And so there just seems to be this widespread opening up of just the sexual politics of our era, where now almost anything goes. And the goal of some of these activists is that anything goes, that they literally want anything to go, and they're getting their way. And so I quoted a few excerpts from Pathology where he talks about this. One of just the basic ideas that he lays out is that in every society there are people who have certain psychopathologies who feel different. That causes them this inner angst. They don't fit into normal society. They think and feel in different ways. And that causes them to to be dissatisfied with the society in question. And some of those people then dream of a world where they are in power and where they can impose their way of seeing the world onto others. And that expresses itself in like borderline personality and psychopathy and schizoid schizoid ways of doing that. And one of the ways they do that is through what Lobachevsky called, relatively controlled pathological egotism. And so, what is relatively controlled pathological egotism? Well, egotism is like the arrogance, self-certainty, the belief that I'm right and everyone else is wrong. There's absolutely nothing wrong with me. In fact, if you think there's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with you. And you see this in extreme forms extreme forms of psychopathology, like an extremely paranoid person with actual, identifiable, obvious delusions, like that everyone's out to get them, that the Soviets are still around, they're beaming stuff into his brain, so is the CIA, and and that person over there was just looking at me, they're actually working for the KGB, and it can be even more extreme than that. To most people, that's obvious, right? But if you were to talk to that person and try to say, no, there's something wrong with you, this isn't what's going on. You're having this is a delusion. They'd be like, no, it's like you're actually part of the conspiracy. You're trying to gaslight me, to convince me that there's something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with you. So that's like the extreme form, and that's basically what is behind this. So when this small minority of transgender activists are convinced that there's nothing wrong with me, that there's, I have no mental health problems. In fact, there's something wrong with everyone else, and they are the ones that need to get on board. They're the ones that need to accept me for who I am and change, on a very basic level, what they think about the world and what they think about people, and basically allow the takeover of the consensus morality and to shift it in this new direction. And so when you see it in those terms, it becomes much clearer what's going on, because you can see that's what I was talking about with this narcissism of, I don't care about all these other people. I don't care about the kids. I don't care if it makes the kids uncomfortable. What's more important is making me comfortable, making me feel accepted and wanted and respected and loved. But who cares about all the kids? Who cares about all the girl athletes? I'm more important. This is for me.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that because, you talked about the level of absurdity that is on display with this teacher's prosthetic breasts, and it seems to me that it's not just an attempt to make this person feel comfortable with their sexuality, so-called, but it's a deliberate provocation. And the thing is, I've worked with trans men transitioning to women before who've had very small prosthetic breasts to make themselves feel comfortable with what they were doing and who they were. And this is so in your face, complete with erect nipples, that, like some of the kids said that it was hilarious. But it also seems to be an inducement to feel something about this teacher. Whether it be revulsion, disgust, or some kind of odd attraction among this teacher students. And so in that sense, it really is a very, pathological display of what it is they think they're doing. And it reminded me a great deal of something I had read recently about transhumanism. There was a study done, I think 450 individuals were interviewed with questions about what technologies they would be likely to want to use to enhance themselves. Transhumanists primarily are looking to do two things. One, to live forever, and two, to enhance their intelligence. But there are all sorts of other things that the technology that transhumanism promises present as possibilities. And what the psychologists doing this study discovered was that the individuals who were most likely to want to adopt the technologies of enhancement fell into the dark triad of psychological traits: Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism. And so, you have this whole, there's transgenderism, transhumanism, and this will, this trend, this mindset among many now in both trans communities to take the shortcuts, to look at a material technology or means of so-called enhancement or change to affect some perceived improvement in their lives. And this isn't to say that, many of us don't use health technologies to make ourselves healthier and to improve this or that system in our bodies. But there are degrees to which people are willing to engage in technology, engage in so-called enhancement, engage in augmentation. We've seen people with all kinds of piercings or changes to their physicality that make them resemble animals. Demons, forked tongues, radical pigmentation, eye changes, all of these kind of outer and inner changes that are very very much shortcuts and quick fixes and pathologized ways of addressing what I think would otherwise be described as something that's missing in their makeup, missing in their being. And they unfortunately don't have the tools or are unaware of the many tools that are available to us that could seek to make them whole in a way that all of this is pointing to. This deficiency that is screaming for the quick fix, screaming for the superficial shortcut, screaming for the newest bit of technology that's going to, make everything great, make everything wonderful, make a person beautiful, make a person more intelligent, make a person more attractive, what have you.
Well, there's one interesting thing with that, Alon, that if you think about the word, trans, there's another word that goes along with what you're talking about that also begins with trans, and that is transcend. That in some way is kind of the purpose in many different things, the spiritual and the materialistic. And the transhumanist, they're looking to transcend their biological limitations, whereas in the more spiritually aligned community, they're looking to transcend the material. And so then I think you're looking at possibly two groups of people who are both looking to do the same thing, which is transcend what they currently are, but are going about it in two different ways because of two different inner makeups, two potentialities, two possibilities which exist. One is to actually transcend materialism, to go in towards the spiritual side of things. And then one is they think is transcending the material, but really is grounding them even further into it and taking them further into the material. So I think that kind of, speaks to what you're talking about with the development of all of these kinds of issues that seem to have similar roots, along the dark triad traits where they are looking to transcend, like you say, by pigmentation, by alterations, et cetera, et cetera. But it's their fundamental makeup for whatever reason. To go with the anatomy of violence, there could be some kind of, brain abnormality. If you want to look at it from a spiritual perspective, maybe they're just, souls on a different path than a majority of people. It's hard to say one way or another. But I think that that's, two ways that we can kind of like look at this and then maybe go from there as to, either what's actually going on or what can be done or, how to actually go about it for us as individuals. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, just my prediction. Oh, one sec, Lou. I'll just give my prediction and then I'll let you go and then I'll say my thought after you. But my prediction is that as transhumanism develops, it's pretty much all just going to be an entire sex industry. like it's good. You've got all these nerds with all of these high ideals. And then once all this stuff actually starts going to be developed, it's all just going to be sex. It's all just going to be sexual augmentation and essentially like furries, but the transhumanist version. So you'll have the people turning themselves into like lizards and demons and just making it as realistic as possible, getting like super prosthetic surgery. And then there'll be like neural adjustments to enhance pleasure. And it's just going to be one huge sex industry. That's my prediction. Because that seems to be what humans do.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue to what I was going to say. To bring the boobs together with the spiritual perspective.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing to do.
bring the boobs full circle.
That's what the show is about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think coming back to this. Teacher and also what you said about transhumanism and the the sex industry that probably will develop out of that, and I think there's something about all of that just speaks to a certain let's say a certain anti-spiritual path, if you will, and that's the idea to basically be like a black hole, right? And just trying to get something, attention, sex, pleasure, all of that stuff. And I think the teacher is a good example of is basically both, right? Just get a sexual kick out of it and get attention and all of that. And I'm currently reading a book by Simone Weil, which I find quite interesting, and she talks about this idea, and it's a bit like Gurdjieff talked about, that she calls it gravity. It's basically like the law that reigns this realm, and you pretty much have hardly any choice except following it. But she says there's a way basically to open yourself up to grace, basically to God, and that alone can make the difference. Otherwise you're just going to be pulled along by gravity and have no choice. And what she says is that one way to do that has to do with intention, and basically to do things without expecting to get anything out of it. So and that, she says, creates a vacuum, an energy vacuum, because usually you do something, you get something, and in that vacuum grace can come in, right? And I think that was kind of a nice way of putting it. And obviously that's you could argue that you always kind of do have some goal, right? Even if it's spiritual development, but I guess that's semantics. The point is more to not act purely in ways that are expedient and that you basically want to get something out of it, but deliberately try not to expect anything in certain situations. And I just thought that's kind of fitting, with when you look at the culture, when you look at that teacher with the big boobs, it's the exact opposite, basically, right? It's just you go in, you want to just suck all the energy around you. You want to get attention, everything like sexual pleasure, all of that. And with the transhumanists, it's a similar story, right? It's just to get something out of it, to make your life prolong your life, and as you said, Harrison, despite all the lofty goals that, as we know, are often kind of like a disguise, right? Anyway, if people talk about lofty goals, and what will happen is pretty clear, right? It's you don't need to be a genius to know what will happen, once people start plugging their brains into stuff. So I just found that's a good way of looking at it from a sort of like hidden spiritual world perspective, or like what's might be going on in the spiritual realm, in those situations. And the way I see it with the booby teacher is basically, in the spiritual realm, she's just basically a demon trying to suck energy around her, and it's the exact opposite of what Simone Weil is talking about here, with how to create a vacuum to have grace, get a connection to grace, basically. And I just wanted to add something about this whole booby issue, because you said someone, I think, something along the lines that in the past, in connection with Cleckley's story, that maybe things were always bad, in a sense, and I think what strikes me as a difference, to where we are today. There were always hypocrites, there were always pedophiles, psychopaths, corrupt politicians, the whole 9 yards, and then there might even be an argument that it was as bad as today, right? Always, maybe. But the thing is, and that's where Lobachevsky really was kind of prophetic with what he said about, psychopath and pathological schizoid people. They want to create a world where they are in charge, right? Where their values are the norm. And I think that's the difference. You always had, the corrupt gangster politician, but these days, that's what they basically advocating for, and you always had the pervert teacher, right? But you couldn't like come with boobies like that into class. They would put you straight in jail, right? Just straight away, just boom, off to jail you go, in the 50s. That wouldn't be even a question, they probably would would have beaten her up, or him at the police station or whatever. I mean, it's just the values. It's a difference. That's my point. To having like hypocrites and perverts around, which is pretty much always the case, and just openly promoting it and forbidding everybody else to say anything about it. That's pretty much the dream of the pathological individual, right? To have this world that serves him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's an element of exhibitionism. That's the word one of the things I was trying to think of earlier, that like exhibitionism is a thing, and I'm pretty sure, well, I don't know what it's like today, because you don't often hear about stories about streakers or, people, guys in public parks at night who flash people. I remember hearing about it a lot more when I was younger, and then stories, of course, are in movies about previous times, like the 50s or the 60s. And like you said, those people would just be arrested. Adam's thinking about something.
Yeah, I just, because there's a number of chat apps that, like, I've seen different language YouTubers use, even like musicians.
Yeah.
Like Omegle, I think.
Yeah, Omegle.
Where they'll, you can talk to anyone in the world.
That's where it is.
And you can, ask them, hey, name a song, and then they can play it on a guitar or, a keyboard, or they can, say, oh, well, what language do you speak? And then they start speaking, and all of a sudden it's like, the secret master of this language is able to communicate with them. And it's a shock factor thing for the YouTube, whatever video that they're doing. But because you have some, like, I've seen some of those videos, and some of the kids that are on there are like super cynical in a lot of ways. Like, these are kids who are like 9 or 10 years old. Their parents don't know what they're doing, nor do they care. They're not around. And so they're just exposed to, and these are websites where adults can talk to kids at any time, and there's no censorship. So God only knows what these kids are seeing.
Yeah, no, I know a little bit of what they're seeing, because I've watched a couple of videos like that. One of them is this guitar player, The Do, I think his name is.
The Do,
and so he's just an amazing guitar player, and he goes on Omegle, and just from some of the things he's said about in his videos about doing that, every time first describe what Omegle is. So it's like a video chat thing where you can put in your interests, and then you can just randomly chat to anyone else who might share an interest with you. And so you just click the button, a new person shows up, you can start chatting with them. Then you can, if you don't like them, you can immediately leave and move on to the next person. And it's kind of fun, because you never know what you're going to get. But what the dude was saying is that every time he does this, you get multiple guys just showing you their dick. Like, it's just all over the place. And then you see all the people, it's mostly kids that are on this thing. They might be teenagers. They look like they're like 13, 14, some younger, like you said. So every one of these kids is seeing that every time they go on Omegle. And, sometimes one of the kids will say, oh, you're the first guy I got that, wasn't just showing me his junk.
Yeah.
Like, so that's what kids are seeing, and so I'd totally forgotten about that. Yeah. So that's where the exhibitionism is these days. It's because you can just do it from your own home and get
anonymously,
the exact same,
and no one will ever find out.
Yeah. So it's totally crazy. But I want to move in the direction you were going, Luke. But first, I want to get into that. I want to reiterate something that we were kind of leading to before. So about how to look at this situation, like the different types of people involved. And I think what it comes down to is that there are just some ways of being in the world, ways of experiencing the world and acting within it that are just incompatible. And that you're never going to have a perfect solution. So you're never going to have a perfect solution where, for example, a minority of the population who has a certain psychopathology, where they feel like the world, where they totally fit in the world, because they can't totally fit in the world because most people aren't like them. And it is a tragedy in a lot of cases. And you can see this, for instance, with a lot of cases of autism, where autistic kids they can't fit in because they're just not wired the same way. And so there might be this basic incompatibility. Now, what a healthy society can do is try to create environments and understandings to allow for that to the greatest extent possible, and to special teaching programs for these kids when they're kids, special teaching environments, learning environments, etc. Maybe programs for adults with certain learning disabilities, or even what these are is emotional disabilities, personality disabilities. But when it comes down to it, this is one of the points that Lobachevsky makes, is that despite all this stuff, there's a very basic reality, is that they, these types of psychopathologies are a minority. And it's not the job of to change the majority on a fundamental level to accommodate the minority. In fact, it's unfortunately, it may suck, but it's the majority's job or responsibility to try to adapt to the world that they live in, to the majority. So, and that might sound totally evil for some of the people that are listening, but it's common sense if you think about it, because we'll go to the extreme. We'll talk about the dark triad and psychopaths. So a psychopath actually believes that he deserves your stuff. If he wants it, it should be his. So that's why psychopaths con people. That's why they steal. That's why they kill, because they want your stuff. They want either your work. If you're in a workplace environment, they want to steal your work and get the credit for it. If you're some granny that's a bit naive and not street smart, well, then she deserves to have her savings stolen by a psychopathic con man, either on the phone or who shows up on her door. That is the world that a psychopath wants to live in, one where your stuff is automatically his, and because he deserves it, and you obviously deserve to lose it because you're such a sucker. Now, because that exists, because there is this psychopathic minority that wants to take your stuff and perhaps kill you if you don't want to give it to them, does that mean that the rest of society should just give into that and just be like, oh, well, we're an inclusive society. We want to make sure all of our members feel safe and included and respected. So just give him the money, just grandma, just let him take it, He just doesn't understand. He really does deserve your stuff because he's special. He's different. It's like, no, that's not the way the world works. It's not the way the world will ever work. And I think people need to kind of realize that. So when you look at the numbers, how many people in the world are actually going around dressing up as women wearing giant boobs? I haven't seen one. This is the first one I've seen. There's obviously something wrong with this situation. With the individual in question. There's something abnormal going on here. It's not a matter of, oh, well, this is just totally normal. It's obviously not normal. So why is it then his student's responsibility to put up with this? Why is it the parent's responsibility to put up with this? No, it's the responsibility of a person in that situation to read the room and say, okay, I'm in this environment. I guess I've got to kind of constrain my self-expression for the period of time that I am in this situation, out of respect for everyone else in the room. And I'm going to try not to be super selfish about it. I'm going to try to be a little selfless about it. And then maybe when I get out of this environment, I can let loose and, put on my giant boobs in the mirror and admire myself. Go ahead. But our priorities and responsibilities have been just completely inverted. And so to bring this back to this new direction, one thing that kind of came to mind when thinking about these kind of incompatible ways of being is, do we want to look at this in more spiritual terms? Because there's some interesting stuff in, Luke, you've written a couple articles on Paul's the original Christian theology in the letters of Paul, which is actually quite interesting, even if you're not Christian. And I've been reading recently. I just started reading this book, the Gnostic Paul. So because some of the Gnostics in the 2nd century had a very particular and interesting way of interpreting Paul's letters, a very Gnostic way, believe it or not. And they had some interesting ideas about people, because Paul talks about some interesting things. I mean, he's got some infamous things that he's said, but but he seems to describe different types of people. Like he describes, I can't remember like very basically, you might have like just the evil people, and then you've got what people he calls the elect, the saints, the people who are perfected, and then you've got the kind of people in the middle who are kind of struggling and can't necessarily do what they want to do and end up doing the things they don't want to do. And there are these kind of divisions of humanity that are roughly hinted at or alluded to in Paul's letters. And the Gnostics just take it and they go like full on hardcore. It's like, no, there's this group, and this group, and it's totally set in stone. And it's like, so you've got the Hylics, those are like the demonic people that are just totally entrenched in materiality and physical nature, and those are the demons. And then there's the psychics. So these are the psychics from the word psyche. So these are the kind of just the regular mind or soul people who are more guided strictly by social convention and the kind of the stoicheia, or the elements, the religious rules, the social rules, and they can kind of go in either direction. They can choose, which side to be on. And then there's the pneumatics, the spiritual, pneuma being breath or spirit. So there's the spiritual, the pneumatics, and they are the elect. They're the kind of perfect ones who, in some cases, may struggle because they still live in spiritual bodies, but they're the ones who are perfected. They don't need to be saved. In the same manner that the psychics need to be saved. So you've got this, strict division of Hylics, psychics, and pneumatics, and I think they probably read a bit too much into Paul, like stuff that it wasn't there, but they actually do so in such a way that's internally consistent, and they can, so they can look at a passage in the letters of Paul that maybe wasn't intended the way they wanted it to, but the way they interpret it, everything works and everything fits together, which is kind of interesting. But I think that they actually, by doing so, they actually get at some of the things that were hinted at in these letters. Is that there are these rough divisions, like if you think about it, if you just look at the world, there are people who seem fully entrenched in this physicality, and we've been talking about that, in relation to transgender, transhumanist ideology and the dark triad, psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism. And then you've got people that are kind of like wishy-washy, that kind of can go one way or the other. They might follow the crowd. And then you've got people that seem to be just immune to that, and to those who are either in the process of, or who have kind of, in a sense, transcended that materiality, and there are resonances with all kinds of other systems too, whether it's like later esoteric Christianity or like Gurdjieff that we've talked about. There's some Sufi traditions, Dabrowski's psychology, a ton of different directions to go in. But I wonder if you guys had any thoughts or wanted to take that in any different directions.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that came to mind when you talked about leading up to the Paul issue was this idea that it might sound cruel to separate society into like this group and that group. Let's say like a psychopath and healthy people for a start. I think that the big difference is that you cannot make the case, as people are trying today, all the liberals and that everything goes kind of thing, that is just, like people are just different, and so just leave them be, right? And don't discriminate against them. Because I was thinking about a philosopher that I read years ago, Bernard Williams, an English guy. I think he wrote like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, something like that. And he wrote a book about morality. And he was kind of an atheist, and so it wasn't really spiritual or anything. But he described what he called, I think, the amoralist. So that's basically someone who within a moral system is a parasite, right? So he basically takes advantage of morality, and he didn't use the psychological terms, but I think it's pretty close to what we would call a psychopath or something like that. Because the thing is, it's not that a psychopath or some of these psychopathologies that they're just different, right? And you could just put them maybe on an island together and they would do their thing and just would be just different, and there you go. Because they need, they need the environment of normal people to prey upon, and they need to be a parasite. So you can't just put them, somewhere on an island. That wouldn't work. They
would be cruel.
The very reason they can exist, right, is that they prey, and that they use the morality and the values of normal people, normal society as their hunting grounds, and prey on people. And that's why, thinking about it, it might not be sustainable for them, to even though they want to transform society in their image, they might ultimately self-destruct, right? Because if there's no value system, no morality that they can prey upon, if it's everything like just goes to hell, then they might not be able to exist either. So that's kind of like the first thing. I don't know where to go in, with this distinction of like the Gnostic distinction, but I think there is definitely something to it in Paul, when he talks about people who walk according to the flesh and people who walk according to the spirit, things like that. And it seems also at times that he thinks that you can actually develop, to basically, I mean, that's what he was trying to do, I suppose, to help people get to that place where you can walk by the Spirit. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well. It's not, that you're born as this super enlightened being, and that's pretty much it, and it's a done deal. But the way I read it or I understand it is more that we might be different in our potentials, right? And so there might be someone who has a very high potential spiritually, but if things don't go well, he might as well end up a total materialist and scumbag. I mean, there's some effort that is required to actualize that potential. So that's, I think, something really important to keep in mind, to avoid, if you engage in that type of Gnostic thinking, let's say, to avoid like a simplistic picture that you just can easily, point to people and say, okay, this guy, he's very advanced, this guy, oh, he's a materialist, and this guy, he's an NPC, so that it's just not so easy, and we should be very careful, because sometimes, that's what Paul also talks about, right? This subtle perception of the spiritual, which is super difficult. And you can see in the Gospel of Mark, right, which is basically an exposition of Paul's theology. You can see that play out in the narrative, right, with all those people who just don't get it, and constantly fail his disciples, and they just never get it. And even if it's pretty obvious, and so it can be really hard to develop this subtle perception. And it's not, that just because someone says something, that you kind of agree with politically, then you conclude, oh, right, so this is an advanced spiritual soul or whatever.
Another advanced
soul. You agree with me.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So it's just, I think a better way of thinking about it might be in terms of potential for development, and that it's very subtle. And I don't know what your experiences are, but, I have known in my life a few people that I just thought were absolutely wonderful and great and deep, who never read a book in their life, didn't know anything about politics, nothing, right? But I would much prefer those to, certain trolls on the internet who, know all kinds of stuff and take and think they're super advanced, and so I mean, it's a bit simplistic what I said now, but I think you get the point, right? So that it's just it's a subtle affair.
I think maybe to go along with what you say, because I agree with you to have it in just 3 very strict categories. Like even if there is some sort of nuance to it, that still is rather like simplistic and kind of shallow. Where, like you're saying, potential, I think, is one aspect of it, but I think in inclination would be another piece of that puzzle, where everyone has certain potentialities, and then everyone has different inclinations, and so whereas you could see the what were they called, the hylix, as being like born of stone, so to speak, where it's just, completely unchangeable and immutable in any and every way. Maybe in certain cases, but I wouldn't want to paint that with a broad brush, even with certain people who fit within a cluster B personality disordered, framework. Like even I wouldn't want to paint too wide too wide a brush on that, so to say. So then I think if you, like you say, you bring in potential and inclination, where each person has their own inclinations and potentialities, and that gets into situations of, I think, things we can't even really grasp. Because then you're talking about like soul potential. Well, what does that even mean? What does that look like? But then you could look at it from a Dabrowski standpoint of multi-level, positive or negative integration. And I think that would be a really useful framework for being able to kind of tease out what the spiritualist language is actually describing in a real way. I think that becomes a really good and useful tool. And so everyone has different potential for it, and some people have different inclinations. Some people are interested in being the best possible person that they can be. Some people just aren't that interested, and that's okay. That's just, natural, normal human divisions.
Yeah, for Dabrowski, that like both things were important: multi-levelness and multi-dimensionalness. So I think that those frameworks, they're interesting and probably true to a large degree, but as heuristics.
Yes.
So they're roughly true. So in practical reality, you will find people who never develop past a certain point and who seem to have zero developmental potential. You'll have people that seem to have some developmental potential, and if you track the course of their life, maybe they rise and fall, and they in different dimensions, and they're kind of all over the place. But then you also have individuals throughout history, the exemplars, the perfected, the people that seem to have fully developed or very fully developed their personality to the point where you would consider them one of the elect. But the way I see it is more of like a bell curve, where you have like the lowest level of developmental potential and the highest. And the highest, it's almost guaranteed that no matter what life experiences, that person is going to be great. And then you've got the people at the very bottom who, chances are throughout their life, they're going to be a total train wreck or, just a total psychopath. But it might be helpful to think of the process and the potential as like almost stochastic in nature. So even at that bottom part, there's a non-zero chance that development is possible, even if it's very tiny. And there's a non-zero chance, even at the top, that person can go down a bad path and turn really evil. And so the borders between these heuristic categories can be more blurry than they would first appear as, right? And another way of looking at it is because really all of the clinical and just observational evidence of psychopaths, like the true blood, true born psychopaths, are that they don't change. They may mellow out with age, but their nature is set in stone, right? But it may be so. When looking at any individual case, it may be that okay, you can say this person. We've looked at their entire life, birth to death, and there was zero sign of developmental potential. But when you look at them as a group, it's almost like as a group, oh well, maybe there's one or two who can change a bit, and maybe move up a little level. Maybe they'll never be a saint, but there is that non-zero chance that something is possible. And I think it just maybe it helps to just keep in mind that way of looking at things when trying to categorize people into these broad groups.
Well, I think that brings us kind of back to the beginning of the show in a sense, because when we were discussing transgenderism and this the booby teacher and how it relates to the dark triad and transhumanism, we were looking at those ways of thinking that are not conducive to any kind of spiritual development or growth in a non-materialistic sense. And what we've moved towards in this discussion is acknowledging that there is a potential within many of us, given the will, given the material, the knowledge, the ways of thinking about it, that and the work, as you were saying earlier, Luke, of growing ourselves in some fashion. And so, it reminds me a little bit of Verse Lewis's, one of the things that he had said in the interview of recently in the show that we had with him, is that it is helpful just to know on one level that there are things that are out there that do address these issues, that do discuss our development and reaching for an understanding that is on a level above where we may currently be. And I think that Paul is one such voice for this development within ourselves and how we connect to that higher function and that higher level of understanding. I found it very interesting, for instance, that in a recent article I came across on transhumanism, a religion for postmodern times, the author quotes Paul towards the end of it as a counterpoint to this new postmodern religion of transhumanism. That Paul's message of love and having love and having knowledge is a basis for going in that opposite direction. But it's just not something that we're ever instructed to do. Most of the sermons and the preachings that I think I've heard growing up are kind of two-dimensional. And I've never gone to a class in university that began to broach these subjects with any amount of depth. So we have things that we can look at if we're so inclined, as you would say it, Adam, to look at them and to assimilate and to reach for.
That's what we do. Do you want to wrap it up there? Ilan always has the closing argument.
The closer.
Always, sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good spot to end, unless you guys had anything else to say. Luke?
I'm just wondering how that will play out with the booby story. Because yeah, so I hope that that people will, like maybe be motivated to, or as Adam said, like be more inclined maybe towards different views of the world, different outlooks, because it's just so crazy. So that's my hope.
Yeah.
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 All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for today. Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully you got some interesting thoughts, some things to pique your interests and your inclinations. So if you like the show, like it, subscribe, share it around the spheres on the internets.
If you've listened this far, the least you can do is like and subscribe. That's what I say.
And we'll see y'all again soon. Bye.